So, welcome to the Real Women in Tech podcast. The topic of our show today is Unshakable Confidence, Strategies for Women in Tech. Our guest is Celine Herve. Celine is the people partner and Grammarly in San Francisco. She's an author of Swipe Right on Confidence, a no-nonsense self-help book for young women. And she's a former global leader at Google, specializing in people operations in AI companies. Celine, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here.
And today we are diving deep into the topic of confidence. And there is a report titled The State of Gender Equity in Tech, and it revealed a staggering statistic. 70% of women in tech feel they need to work harder and prove themselves because of their gender. So we'll have a lot of things to unpack today. And let's start with your incredible journey. So you spent 9 years at Google before joining Grammarly, and you took on a variety of impactful roles, from serving as a diversity and inclusion business partner at Google X to your role as a senior program manager on the Everyday Robots team, which was the largest team at Google X. Can you tell us a little bit about what were your highlights of your time at Google?
Yeah, 9 years is a long time, so it's gonna be hard to choose, obviously. But I've had the opportunity in those 9 years across different countries to engage in remarkable experiences. If I were to maybe pick three, like one would be seeing an innovative robot dance performance in the office from my very talented team at Everyday Robots. Another one would be the opportunity to explore over 20 Google offices across the world, from Paris to New York and Tokyo. Just being able to visit everyone, and each culture was incredible. But if I were to really truly choose one that was absolutely memorable and quite surprising, that would be the time where I had the chance to work directly with the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, when I was leading the I Am Remarkable program for the Silicon Valley. And for those who are not familiar with the I Am Remarkable program, it's a global movement that empowers everyone. At the beginning, it was mostly women, but it moved to underrepresented groups. And the goal is to help them celebrate their accomplishments and challenge perception around self-promotion in the workplace and beyond. And so the FBI was one of our clients, and I was chosen to facilitate the workshop with them. And that was pretty cool.
That is exciting. I'm just learning about your I Am Remarkable experience. I've been part of it, tangentially. I have attended some of the sessions. You want to tell our listeners a bit more? I think we continue to need such programs. So tell us a little bit more about I Am Remarkable and what you did specifically as the Silicon Valley lead for that.
Yeah, so it's a big program. It had been created like a few years before I joined as a Silicon Valley lead. I mean, as I said, the program is the main tool of the program is a workshop, like a 1 hour and a half workshop with like 10 to 12 people, maybe 10 to 15. The idea is really to get participants to be more comfortable about sharing about their accomplishment, acknowledging that, contrary to maybe popular belief, accomplishments do not speak for themselves. And especially for folks who come from different cultures like France, for me, where there's a lot of modesty norms that guide how people, especially women, operate in the workplace. I found it super important when I joined the team in the US to just upskill myself on this strength and then help others get there. Just to share some numbers, I think last time I checked, the program had reached over 600,000 participants, which is almost insane and hard to believe, but I promise it's true. And it has involved and worked with more than 1,300 companies across the globe in almost all countries in the world. So it was really incredible to engage with women. My role was to facilitate some workshops, but especially to scale the program through a fantastic group of facilitators. So I was managing the facilitators and having them just attend different events over a year, and it was pretty incredible.
Exciting.
Yeah, sounds amazing. And I really like that you have this experience of working in different cultures. And one of my personal favorite quotes is from Sheryl Sandberg. And the quote goes, if you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, don't ask what seat, just get in. And the story goes that she got this advice from a former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt. And this quote deeply resonates with me, but also reminds me of your journey. And you had to move from Marseille to Wrocław and then to San Francisco, which sounds like quite an adventure. What were the challenges you overcame along that way?
Well, ever since I was young, I always knew I wanted to live abroad and work in another country when I grew up. So it's never been really a painful decision. I always took this decision with a lot of enthusiasm. Whether it was moving to Wrocław, a city I couldn't pronounce the name, or moving to San Francisco. To answer your question more directly, when I was studying in Marseille in business school, I got my first career opportunity from an event, an internship at Google. Why Wrocław? Everyone is wondering, because I don't speak Polish and I'm French. Is because the work I was doing was done out of Wrocław as the hub for different countries, and I was supporting French-speaking clients. So moving there to start my career at Google, stayed there 3 years, and then I moved to the US. It was certainly challenging. I'd say the main challenge was moving from a high context culture to a low context one. And what that means is that in France and also in Poland, to some extent, providing context and sharing more information than needed sometimes is very important. You have to build a relationship first, and it's not seen as losing time or wasting someone's time. Well, in the US, I had to learn to be much more direct and concise, which obviously I'm still working on, but I've made so much progress on over 7 and 8 years here. And it was a lot of, the challenge came from the fact that it was a lot of push and pull, always trying to adjust, being too much, not enough. One time, my directness made a colleague cry because I asked a question that I thought was normal, but that person felt offended by it. But at the same time, I remember vividly in my first month in the US when people would tell me, "Hi, how are you?" and then move on, that I would actually answer the full answer to "How are you?" and expect to have a small conversation. Well, it's more kind of a hello here in the US. So it was kind of an adjustment, but I think that's part of adjusting to different cultures, and I always love to understand those dynamics and adapt to them.
Keep disrupting yourself is probably a part of the theme of your career. And not only did you transcend cultures and build this very rich tapestry of experiences, transcending them, you've also recently joined, you've been with Grammarly now for a couple of years, but you took the transition from Google, which is a very large tech, into Grammarly, which is a relatively smaller tech. Tell us a little bit about that transformation and what did it entail and how did you approach it?
Yeah. Well, as we discussed earlier, I had spent 9 years at Google, and that was my first company. And so I had in my mind a kind of flexible deadline of 10 years when I would want to discover what other companies, other cultures, maybe try to be in a space where there's maybe a little bit less bureaucracy or more scope and just more responsibilities. I was always craving for just more decision-making abilities and things like that in my roles. I had a couple of companies on my top list. One of them was Grammarly. The other one was Duolingo. As a product, I fell in love with Grammarly when I started working in Poland. It would help me a lot because English is not my first language, and it was always my sidekick for everything I did. And so joining was pretty natural after 9 years at Google. And I'm still in a similar position that I was at Everyday Robots, just a different scope.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what I found extremely interesting about people is to know a little bit more about them outside of work. And you have some really interesting and exciting hobbies like RL silks and also, of course, nonfiction writing. So can you tell us a little bit about how do they help you recharge and maybe give us a little bit of context? How did they inspire you to write your own first book last year?
Yeah, I know IEL silks is not necessarily super famous as a discipline, so maybe I'll explain what it is. Aerial silk is basically a big piece of fabric that hangs from the ceiling, and performers will like climb and do some tricks and choreographies on it. You might have seen it in a circus or things like that. So I started doing that about 5 years ago, and I love it. I would say, to challenge your question, it was more the other way around. It was more writing the book that helped me find hobbies that were aligned with my interests. Starting a new discipline, like later in your 20s, is quite, requires some courage, especially as a former dancer and rhythmic gymnast. There's just a lot of constraint we put on ourselves, much like perfectionists. So doing aerial silks helped me just have a beginner mindset and be okay with just being my own comparison. And the way it helps me recharge, it's very easy, and you'll understand very quickly. When you're hanging upside down from a fabric high above the floor, there's nothing else you can think about than what you're doing. And this is incredible. And so the artistic skills that it requires is something that I always wanted to keep throughout my life, regardless of how old I am.
You touched upon a couple of very wise nuggets that I want to double click on. The first was discipline in your 20s requires courage. I couldn't agree more. I used to be surrounded with more 20-year-olds when I was at Google. I think the demographic used to be a little bit different there. Growing up in an interesting world that doesn't have to solve some of the basic fundamental problems, courage is hard to find. Talk to us a little bit more about that. What inspired you to actually follow that path and say, in order for me to grow to my North Star, I need to first develop this skill of being courageous?
Yeah. That I didn't necessarily realize it until you brought it up, that it was such a big value for me. And I now remember sitting in a class in business school and us doing an exercise around finding our true values that matter the most and were guiding us. And I remember one of them was courage for me. And what people don't understand, and when they see me sometimes doing bunch of things that are kind of scary, they think I'm never scared, and that's couldn't be further from the truth. It's just that not doing it, and I think there's this quote that says, courage is not the absence of fear, but the fear that you might be missing out on something even bigger. It's really what's guiding me. I want to live a life where I have no regrets. That's my goal in life. And so in every moment, in every decision I have to make that requires courage, whether it's speaking up or doing something difficult, I always keep that in mind and think about my future self. And Celine in her 60s, how would she approach the conversation? And so far it's served me well. So I'm continuing to do that.
The second theme there you touched upon, Celine, was about being your own comparison. I think we could all use more of that, especially I think in tech. Maybe I'm generalizing, but I do feel that there is so much of the person X at this age with this experience is an L6 or an L7 or is already a director. And here I am, and life did not serve me right. I'm very surrounded by that. I was. In fact, that's one of the reasons that I thought that I needed a break from Google myself after 9 years. So that was, I needed more than just levels and ladders around me. Talk to us a little bit about that. We all can learn a bit more about that comparison to yourself.
Yeah. And as a people partner, I always answer that question, talking about the different types of career progression. I'm very type A. I've always been pretty ambitious in wanting to kind of climb the corporate ladder and break the glass ceiling. But at some point, I would say maybe 5-6 years ago, I realized that I could get promoted and work harder and longer in my current role, but that would take me further from what I truly was interested in and being good at. I remember in that role, I ended up being just less interested. So maybe putting my name and raising my hand last for opportunities. And one of my colleagues was promoted before me, and she absolutely deserved it, 100%. And for a second, I paused and I was, you have a little bit of comparison. I wish I had done more. And then I realized it led me exactly where I was supposed to be. And it sounds a little cheesy, but I promise it's true. I realized I was not going to be successful or happy in that role in a long time, and started looking for another position outside of Google. And it was not at the time that I left Google because everyday robots, stood out as an opportunity. I was kind of startup within Google. So it was perfect. I found the role that I'm still in now, as a people partner.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into your book. So I really enjoyed the stories you share in the book. And one of the stories which I found really interesting and that resonated with me was the moment when you mentioned that you were 15, you were participating in many gymnastics competitions and you had multiple wins. And then at some point, you completely forgot your routine at the regional competition. You were in front of 300 people. And it really interesting event. And I would like to know more how that experience impacted your self-confidence.
Yeah. And maybe let's put the participant back into the moment just so that they understand the angst that was coming out of this moment. But yes, I was 15 and I started experiencing blackouts in the middle of my routines for a long time. And until I started doing rhythmic gymnastics pretty early, maybe I was 7. So at the beginning, I was super confident. I would always perform better in the D-Day. And then as I grew up and as I reached teenage years or kind of early womanhood, that's when my mind got in the way more and more. In that time, no one could come and rescue me. I was frozen in the middle of the carpet, paralyzed from stress. And for a long time, I wondered really what had happened to me to cause that change from my very confident young self to this 15-year-old who was starting to question and doubt herself in the moment. And I asked myself some question like, was confidence not supposed to grow with age, experience, practice? And many years later, I started researching that topic of confidence for women specifically, because that's who I am. I'm a woman myself. How is it acquired? How is it lost? How does confidence apply at work, but also beyond, just like in my case? I read a ton of books. I studied neuroscience at Berkeley to study the neuroscience of emotion and its impact on the body. Throughout that research, I interviewed 100 women from very different backgrounds, and ultimately decided to write a book and combine all those learnings into one book. Yeah.
Another very courageous move, I must say, because we all think about it, but how many of us say, well, I need to study this further. Let me understand the neuroscience behind it and go. So way to set an example of follow your passion and go deep into things that you truly care about. So let's go deeper into the book and some of the themes that you highlight. There are 3 that stood out to me, and so we'll cover them one by one. The first and foremost, something which is very, very pertinent to women specifically, but also underrepresented minorities, I think, is self-advocacy. And you earlier talked about modesty norms. It's not just France. I think it's the world that we live in, which has certain modesty norms associated with women. I was caught off guard in my own skin just yesterday, where I was witnessing a woman leader practicing self-advocacy, and I was cringing at it. Talk to us about self-advocacy and the various ways it actually hinders our own growth. And I think it's a lot, you talked about a lot of your mind coming in the middle. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
It's so interesting you bring that up. It happened to me so many times as well. And one of the main messages that the I Am Remarkable program conveys is this one is men and women hate women who advocate for themselves and talk about themselves too much. It's just a thing. I think it's very human. That being said, as now that I'm aware of those biases and perception, I catch myself just like you did, and I support women. It's non-negotiable. And sometimes they don't even know I'm supporting them. Most of the time in my role, I act behind the scene in their support, and I advocate for them without them knowing. It's so easy to criticize women who do it wrong, but most of the time they're just trying. They don't know how. They're just trying, and they might be overconfident. That happened to me once. I'm going to share that cringe example because it will resonate with you as a former Googler. I remember doing this very painful exercise of writing my self-assessment for one of the performance review cycle, which is a huge deal at Google and takes a lot of time. And as I said, English is not my first language. I was starting to practice my skills of self-advocacy. And you know what? I did too much. I amplified my accomplishment by being afraid that it would not be recognized. And I had the best manager at the time, so she shared the feedback in the most thoughtful way. I broke down crying because I was so ashamed that people would think I was a bad person. And it was such a big learning opportunity for me to know that sometimes this overshoot is what helps you know what is too much and right that exact right level of confidence that hopefully makes you feel a bit better about feeling that for a second.
Yeah, I think I suffer from the reverse. I can't believe that even after spending almost 2 decades in the industry, I can't make myself do it. And when I do, I cringe at myself before I even go further. But let's talk a little bit more deeper on this. What do you recommend for people who are shy of it, right? Because of the modesty norms. How would you recommend that people go about it? Men and women, for that matter.
Self-advocacy or just in general?
Specifically self-advocacy, since I think that is a big part of the confidence.
Yeah, let me reflect on what worked for me. I think the first step when you're not there yet is finding someone who believes in you and having them be your advocate or at least help you phrase that. I remember doing that with my little sister, who is 11 years younger than me. It was an inspiration for writing my book. I remember helping her draft her first resume. And she was telling me, I don't have anything. I'm 18. I have no experience. And we looked back and we talked and we found so many examples of relevant skills that she developed through activities and things like that. So being that person for someone else or finding that person is probably a good first step. Second step is maybe just finding your inner best friend and having them write you a letter or list your accomplishments just without any second thought about who will read it, but just for yourself, just list facts are just facts. And it's not bragging if it's based on facts, as the I Am Remarkable program would list it. So I would say that's probably the second tip for that. The last advice I always give, and it's more related to confidence in general, is that I'm very careful about the words I use when talking about myself. I rarely apologize unless I really there's a reason for that. So saying sorry all the time is something that actually hurts you more than what you believe. And I had to unlearn just saying sorry all the time. So something that you can practice with a post-it, and maybe you write how many times are you apologizing when you don't really have to, because that impacts perception of your worth for yourself and others.
That is so valuable, and I feel like we just need to print this out and put it in offices. Just last week, I think I said it to 2 women who were apologizing for no reason at all. What are you apologizing for? I'm having a bad day, and they are coming in saying, I'm so sorry you're having a bad day. And it's no, don't be sorry. Just say that you're with me. Mm-hmm. Don't use the word. That word puts us in a mindset that is a spiral in its own. Okay, let's talk a little bit about another topic from the book. And I'm caught between, should we talk about the dream realization on boundaries? I think we should talk about boundaries because that is the other side of thing, which really, really is a mystery to many. So you talk about identifying when you should create boundaries and then going into establishing them. I would like us to talk more openly about what does it mean to establish boundaries, how that you're lacking the boundaries. How does it impact the mind? How does it impact your performance? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, let me think. Are you mostly interested at work or outside or
any context? I think boundaries are professional and personal both. So if you can't practice in one and not in the other, that's what I'm learning.
Most of us know when all boundaries have been stepped on. We feel it in our body. We feel like there's something wrong. We feel like we should have said something different. We wish we spoke up, or we wish we said no, unless some of us don't realize it. In that case, I don't know if I can speak for that specific scenario. I would say most of the time it falls into those few categories. And where it comes from is from just worrying too much about what other people would think, or just maybe from ingrained belief about what we should and shouldn't do. And it's very true for women who are taught when they are young to, at least in my culture, to ignore, move on, mindlessly turn the other cheek. We're told that's how we're supposed to deal with mean people. And we learned that maybe it's better to ignore and be the bigger person until it doesn't serve us. So that's the first answer to your question, but happy to dive more into it.
So now that we identify, and sometimes listening to your body and the signals is like critical. Now that one identifies, how do you go about it? And I'll tell you exactly where I struggled, and I had to work with a coach on this. It's a very personal example where I had somehow violated my own boundaries of what is the end of the workday for me. So it happened to be that it was a certain time for most people at work. They would leave, picking up kids and stuff, and my day would just keep going on. And then at their will, they would reach out and say, hey, are you still around? Let's have this quick chat about this topic we couldn't talk about. And they're probably on their commute or they're at home spending time with kids. And I'm still in the office and taking this call. And I'm just thinking, why is it okay for me to not just simply say that my work day is also over and I've had a long day and I need a break, and then maybe we can connect about it later. And the reason I was hesitating was because I've not set the boundary from the get-go. I'm that person you can go to 24 hours a day. So now if I go back and say, by the way, I'm now setting boundaries, how's this going to work? I just didn't know how to traverse that. So what advice would you have for that?
Yeah, it's tricky when you don't do it from the beginning, right? Because what people think you do is what they think you do. So let's just talk about like a wall. It's harder to build a wall when there's like trees that have already grown from it, right, under it. In that case, I think you don't have to do it, like, especially in like senior roles, like I'm sure like a lot of us are in. It's not like we can wake up one day and be like, those are my working hours. If you contact me after, you will not hear from me. I think we can do it without saying it, right? Like, just in that case, I would delay my answer. Like, if this is not urgent, just simply not answering sometimes. And silence is a super powerful tool, whether it's in conversation to like change the power dynamics at times with someone. Silence is a very powerful tool. Silence, whether it's in like spoken or in just an absence of response. It can mean no, especially in the US. So I would start there and then adjust unless it's really urgent, and then I'll take the call.
Sounds great.
Can I jump in with my question to you, Shivam? You mentioned the interesting case, and we heard Celine's perspective. Can you tell us how you resolved it? Were you able to manage it, and are you satisfied now with the boundaries you built?
Yeah, I think I did. I transitioned out of Google into my new role here at NVIDIA, and I've created the boundaries from get-go. So I have to admit that it was not very easy to do it while I was there because it was just a very difficult conversation. I did try to have it, and at the same time, it's like, I'm also enjoying this to a certain extent because of the people I'm working with. It's just fine. This is okay. But in my new role, I've established very clear boundaries. I'll tell you about a boundary that I found it very hard to get out of happy hours from work, and I have a 10-year-old. I love to put her to sleep or just say goodnight to her. And if you're at a happy hour, it's just going to extend, and 8:30, 8:45, 9 o'clock. I now have a rule. At 7:30, I start to shift my chair. At 7:45, I'm boots out. And it doesn't matter who's in attendance. I will do that because that's how I define my boundary. So it's easier when you're starting fresh. In the old scenario, what I ended up doing is I also changed my schedule. And I said, if this is the time when somebody's in commute, then this is also time that I'm picking up my daughter. So perfect. Why don't I also leave early? And we're both in commute and we can have this conversation. I can pick her up, come back and say, okay, let's talk now. Because I've checked off my duties and at the same time adjusted my schedule to match that. So a little different way of creating that boundary, but it worked. But I had to acknowledge that I'm not comfortable with this every day. It was hard. It was very hard.
Yeah, great. And of course, it's the practical advice which I'm taking from this conversation regarding boundaries, that it is much easier to build them in the very beginning than try to kind of rebuild and change the dynamics once people are already used to certain things happening. Celine, let's go back to your book and let's talk about practical aspects. So our intention with this podcast is for it to be like a workshop for people listening, and you're an expert in confidence. You wrote a book on it. And I would like to hear about your perspective. What are the most common barriers women especially women in tech, face when trying to build self-confidence?
Yeah. And before answering that question, I want to challenge some bias that there is in like the movement around women empowerment. A lot of people think that the main barrier is that women don't advocate for themselves enough. And it's starting to be wrong. This has been proven that in the context, for instance, of salary negotiation, there's been some research done that shows that women now advocate and negotiate as much as men, if not more. They just get less. And so I think that's a very new take on the movement that I always want to raise, so that the accountability is shifted a little bit from being solely on telling you're not negotiating enough, like you should advocate, but more on trying to figure out what are the systemic limitations and the institutional constraints that exist in our institution, or HR policies and things like that lead to that outcome. So I'm going to stop here because I think that's like something that a lot of people assume is not happening, but is something we should start with versus think as a kind of a second problem.
And I'm sure, Celine, you've experienced this at Google, because it's a very open culture of seeking mentorship and saying, I love your confidence. Tell me how I can be like you. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. It's always a little bit awkward when someone tells you that, because there's always a different perception. I'm very aware of this one, where like you might seem very confident doing something because you're intentionally doing an action, but what you feel inside might not be fully confident. And that's kind of the debate around fake it until you make it. And I'm happy to share my perspective on this later. What I say is I try to like put myself in their shoes and meet people where they are. Because if you just give like blind advice to someone without knowing where they're coming from, what are their strengths, their weaknesses, it's just very hard to have them improve. And it's not like everyone can shift overnight, like their personalities. Some of them have maybe traumas that they're working through that I'm not aware of. And so I generally ask more questions and answer in those cases and try to find what are some very small, like practical steps they can take. Just like maybe for the next month, you write on a post-it how many times you said sorry. And I want you to decrease that by 50% the next month. Or I'm going to tell them if they have a lot of doubts about like how they show up in meetings, maybe ask one question per meeting or share your perspective one time. Just those very small steps that make a big difference in the long term.
Yeah, baby steps go a long way. That's very true. It's hard, especially in tech, where there is just so much pressure at all times. I'm sure you're going through something similar with the Grammarly Coda integration. It's a opportunity. Congratulations on the merger acquisition. You want to frame it as, I think it's a great idea for the industry to have these two companies come together. But I'm sure there's a lot of pressure that we are constantly in as a result of all the happenings that happen in the industry. So you have this pressure from the outward, you have the pressure from the inward, which is like, oh my goodness, I am failing at it, or I have some setbacks or trauma from past life. What are some tips and tricks and ways that you reconcile these forces that end up creating that dissonance in people?
You're right. There's certainly a lot of ambiguity in today's world, especially in tech, where there's not a lot of guidance provided at times, and you have to figure out your own way, almost very independently. I know something that works for me in those cases is just taking it like one step at a time, and knowing that often even folks above me in the hierarchy don't necessarily know better. And not because you should, but because I think it's a misconception that your managers always have the answer to everything. And so trusting yourself to come up with an idea and putting a plan forward and recommendation for something you think is the best idea at the time with the information you have will be very appreciated. And once I switched that mindset in my mind versus waiting for instruction to be pushed down on me, it unlocked my career. It started helping me to manage up more efficiently to leadership, because I was not adding work on their plate. I was taking work away. And then sometimes my ideas are not the best, but it was at least something to start with and something to react to, which is very appreciated. And most of the time, I'd say the second thing that I'm thinking about is when we have setbacks, like the story of the performance assessment I shared. That's very cringy. I think everyone will agree on that. It's never as much about you as you think. People don't care about you as much as you think they do, and it's a good thing, not a bad thing, a good thing, because they have limited time in their day, and the amount of time you're spending on overthinking something is probably most of the time not necessary.
Yeah, such a nice reminder that people don't think about you as much as you think they are. We will move into one of our all-time favorite segments of our show, which is questions from our listeners. And today we have a couple of interesting ones. So one is about negotiation. So we have a listener, and she is job hunting and struggling with negotiation, particularly around salary and benefits. And she also fears rejection. And in today's market, it's really relevant. So how do you challenge the notion, and you already talked a little bit about it, how do you challenge the notion that women don't negotiate as often as men, and how should she approach negotiation and get what she wants, specifically regarding salary and benefits?
So I'll start by saying something that, again, can be a bit counterintuitive for us, like as someone who like always strive for empowering women, is the first step is know your worth. Because knowing your worth means you can sometimes, and you should, ask for more, but there's also times where you should know that there is a market constraint with supply and demand, like now, where it's so more difficult to find a job, and maybe you're more junior in your career, and going for a director position from the get-go is, you should try, but also know that it might not happen. So I think that's something that, like, having that self-awareness from the beginning will help you be more confident in your negotiation when you are striving for the right, like, challenge. And I encourage you to always apply for roles, even if you don't meet all the requirements. I myself look at, like, if I meet half of them, I go for it personally. But I would say some very concrete advice that you don't necessarily put in a book, because it's always a little difficult and tricky to talk about that, is having leverage. When you're negotiating, having leverage helps. What that means is, if you want to negotiate, you want to create a feeling of missing out from one of the players. How you do that is by having competing offers. And it's very common in the industry, especially in senior roles, that people negotiate this way. That's how you will create some change and be able to negotiate your salary and compensation. The second advice is, don't think about salary only. Think about total compensation package and know what your inner consensus is. Don't share it. Just know what's your inner consensus, the minimum you will accept, and what's really important for you, and your ideal case scenario. And then start from the ideal scenario and see how much you have to give in until you land on something that is mostly better than your inner consensus. Those are like very like concrete things I personally have done and have worked for me.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's such a great advice. Don't think only about salary, but think about the whole compensation package. And it reminded me about one story, like an anecdotal story I heard over the weekend. My friend shared it with me. So he had a friend, and she's right now in the process of negotiation for a job offer. So she hires a negotiation coach to help her out. And they have a couple of sessions. And in one of the sessions, she shares with her coach that she always wanted to have a G-Wagon. So the coach tells her, like, you can try include it in the negotiation. And she does it. And guess what? She gets the G-Wagon.
That's incredible.
Like, yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, it's a true story.
I think, Celine, you'd make a great negotiation coach.
Maybe I should sign up for that. I do that pro bono so far. Yeah, one tip that I forgot to share, I think, is never share a number first. So, like, I think it's pretty like known, and there's a lot of like great influencers on YouTube who tell you exactly what to say, but don't share a number on your salary. Just, I think in the US, just know the law. There's a lot of places where this is, you don't have to share it, and people cannot ask you about your current compensation. So just make sure you keep the leverage until later and ask for more information at the beginning, then give it. So that's where the silence comes very handy.
Great advice. So another question from our listener is about the topic we encounter in our lives. I think all of us face at some point. It's about imposter syndrome. So we have a listener with 10 years of experience, and she's in a director level position. And she moved from one area of expertise into another. And despite her senior role, she feels like she's back into intern mode. And she's downplaying her experience and achievements. So, Celine, what practical steps can she take to own her expertise and silence that imposter voice?
I would say start by understanding that everyone feels this way. I wrote a book about self-confidence and I felt like that, like very often. What makes a difference is, again, acknowledging it, recognizing it, and moving past it. By being in, just wanting, like, to be in integrity with yourself and serving yourself before you serve the fear that, like, drive the imposter syndrome. It's very normal, and having imposter syndrome means you're challenging yourself enough that you're not always in your comfort zone. It's not comfortable, right? But I know that the saying, fake it until you make it, sometimes can seem a little bit hollow, and I'd like to maybe dive a little bit deeper into what that means for me, and maybe my version of it is not to be inauthentic. That's another one of my value. I always want to be true to myself and not be different at work and outside. So it's not about being fake. It's the idea that you will eventually make it by temporarily quieting your inner voice and acting like the most confident and authentic self you can be until you actually believe it yourself. And so at the beginning, it might be not 100% true that you're confident, but it will show as confident. And then in time, there will be no effort.
Yeah, that's a lovely interpretation of something that is often used in imposter syndrome scenarios. Thanks for sharing that unique perspective. All right. I can't believe we've been talking for a while and it's almost coming towards the end of our show. So many wisdom nuggets. Thank you for sharing those with us, Celine. As we wrap, what are some of the resources that you'd like to share with our listeners that you tap into for inspirations? Any books, podcasts, shows that you watch, speakers that you follow? Where can they go to seek a broader perspective on some of the topics that we discussed today?
One, we talked a lot about negotiation, and I think building financial awareness for women, especially in their 20s, which is my area of expertise, is very important. A program that I've been part of, and I strongly recommend for those who are getting started, especially in the US, is called the Money Confidence Program. And it's by an influencer called Tess Worthless. Incredible, super practical. It's a 6-week program where she takes you through all the financial decisions and different ways to, like, invest, for instance, when you don't know what to do with the money, if you have some. So that's a concrete program you can do. You can take. Let me think about other tools. I think I Am Remarkable. Like, if you have a chance to take to sign up for a workshop, just go on their website and take it. I've always heard people leave with lots of great insights and just find it very valuable in the long term. So I strongly recommend it. It's available virtually everywhere in the world. And of course, I'd be remiss if in a podcast about self-confidence, I would not promote my own book. So my book is called Swipe Right on Confidence. It's available everywhere, all countries, all formats on Amazon. If you look for my name or Swipe Right on Confidence. So I think the link will be added to the note on the podcast. Feel free to check it out and tell me what you think.
Awesome. Fantastic. I can't wait to finish the book. I started it and I'm looking forward to wrapping it up this weekend likely. So thank you for sharing such wisdom with us. My last question, and with that we'll wrap. So Celine, here you go. What's your superpower? One. Only one.
Power? A superpower I want to have or I already have?
You already have.
Okay. Otherwise I would choose flying, like that's my go-to, 100%. My superpower. I think one of the leaders I worked with in the past taught me a word in English I didn't know that now I resonate a lot with and gives me power is unflappable. So I'd say that's my power. Like, there's very little that scares me or intimidates me. And I think that's my superpower because I don't put any limits on my dreams.
Well, it resonates with your unshakable confidence. So thank you so much. This was a fantastic session. We really learned a lot about your journey and also just how much you are doing in your role at Grammarly, with the books that you're writing, with I Am Remarkable, a very rich tapestry of experiences that you bring to the table, Celine. Good luck to you. And I hope there are more books coming from you in the near future.
Thank you. Thank you, Shivam. Thank you, Igor.